Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. So this is the webinar series titled Reimagining the Future, People's Agenda for a Post-COVID Economy, and is a part of a larger process to initiate debates on the alternate economy while addressing some of the immediate needs. This has been a collective effort of civil society organizations, social movements, trade unions, and networks. The series itself is a very interesting outcome of attempting to answer the question, what now? As most of the adverse impacts of the crisis that we are facing today all around us, and especially we are seeing the most vulnerable being victims of this. It's not just because of the health crisis, but a crisis of the neoliberal capitalist structure. Hence, this attempt to see if we can collectively ideate and maybe start the conversation of building a new world is what the goal of this webinar series was. And we are very happy to have with us our speaker for today, Sujata, Mody. Tanveer Pasha will probably join us in a little bit. And our moderator for today is Archana Prasad. To introduce Archana to all of us, Archana Prasad did her PhD from the Center for Historical Studies in JNU and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Science and Technology in Cornell. Prior to joining the Center for Informal Sector and Labor Studies, she has been a fellow of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and was teaching at the Center for Jawaharlal Nehru Studies and the Department of History at the Jamia Millia Islamia. She specializes in research on the contemporary history of Adivasi livelihoods, labor and resistance, women and labor, environmental and labor history. Her current research is focused on the ideologies of resistance and forms of protest amongst Adivasi workers through the collection of their oral histories. She is involved with several grassroots and working class movements and has served on several government committees concerning women's and Adivasi issues. She has published several books, scholarly and popular articles as well, on a wide range of subjects related to Adivasi and women's issues. Before I hand over the forum to Archana, just a little housekeeping. So as a Zoom format instruction, I would request all of you to keep your microphones on mute all the time. And if you can kindly type in your questions and comments and feedback that you have, that'll help the moderator go through it thematically. And the entire event is also being streamed on Facebook, Facebook live video. The Hindi translation is available for our participants, and to listen to the discussion in Hindi, participants will have to select the French option on Zoom and mute the original audio in the language interpretation option on Zoom. A detailed guideline for this has also been sent to most of our participants. And we also request you to pass around the word that volunteers are welcome to help us in much of the processing of this webinar series. So kindly do write to us. Our emails are on the senfa.org website. And a request to our speakers to speak slowly so that it will help our translators to do a great job. So thank you, everyone, and over to Archana. Thank you, Archana, for agreeing to moderate this session.
Thank you, and welcome to this session. As you know, there were meant to be 3 speakers in this session. Right now, one of them is here, and we are expecting at least one more person to join us. So, before I hand over to Sujata Mody, who's quite a well-known trade unionist in Chennai and has been working with different kinds of informal workers over a long period of time, I would like to just make a few remarks. And I just want to say that the crisis that is faced by labor is not a new one. However, the pandemic has highlighted some of the issues that should have been highlighted much earlier. More specifically, the issues of the migrants, recently the issues of the domestic workers. As far as Adivasis are concerned, there's very little talk about it, even in this context, and that's really not fair. I mean, the way in which discrimination works in relief, whether it's for the Dalits or the Adivasis, is, I think, something worth considering. And since they really do make up a large sector of informal labor, that is, I think, one of the issues that I would like to flag over here. I mean, whether you look at construction workers or BD workers or all kinds of workers, these are the sections that are fueling those labor reserves. Secondly, I think we've all been raising issues about social protection, but we know that we are living in a very sort of aggressive right-wing economy right now, and right-wing polity, which is also totally against democracy. So any kind of bargaining power and organization of the informal workers has to be done, but it's becoming more and more difficult, because even if you look at issues like the NRC or the CAA, they really do impact on the citizenship of a lot of these workers. And therefore, I think one of the big questions that we need to address is, how do we deepen our organization amongst these sections, and how do we enter new sections which are not within the fold of any progressive movement, but which are being mobilized to a large extent by a really big organized right-wing force. Whether it's in terms of religious mobilization, or in terms of very hegemonic sabka saath type of politics, which we know is not sabka saath politics, and those kinds of issues. So I think we also have in the audience a lot of people with lot of long experience. So I'm not very worried about the number of speakers and the amount of time they take, because I think we are going to have a very interesting discussion session. And I really welcome this initiative to have a special section on this subject, and perhaps we need more than one special session on this subject, because we are really talking about almost more than 93-94% of the workers. So we need to really sort of put our heads together and look at how we are going to move forward unitedly, despite all our diverse perspectives and all our differences of opinion also. I don't think that this is the time to really emphasize those, considering the attack is so sharp and it's so big. So with that, I'd like to really invite Sujata to talk about her work and the challenges as she sees it, and what are her suggestions on what should be really done. So, Sujata, over to you. I think you can take 20-25 minutes, half an hour.
I want to really thank everyone, especially the organizers, to give me this opportunity. A very tough time for all of us, and to be able to communicate with people who have such varied work and experience. I just start with, what we have been doing from day one in Chennai, from hour to hour actually it was. So it came not as a shock, but this lockdown, the first one, when it came, we were extremely, um, I wouldn't say shocked, but yeah, it was really like we already started to think even in the at that time in the evening, what are people going to do? Because um, it means domestic workers, construction workers, your everyday people whom we see. So having worked with the informal sector, um, my first reaction was it's going to be worse than demonetization. That was my very first expression. And then, of course, things started to unfold. In Chennai, domestic workers still do not have the permission to go to work, and a lot of individual houses and so on are allowing them to come. But we did a broad assessment and we found that about 70 in some areas, 80% in some areas, 100% had not paid the workers for even the month of April, much less May. So situation is very grim, and there are a lot of NGOs which are, helping to distribute food and rations. But can we actually replace the government, however much the civil society struggles? I cannot imagine us reaching everyone. So it calls for a very important kind of a voice, a strong voice, to ensure that the middle and upper classes who are sitting in their homes, who do not have to worry about going to work, of course, I do believe that they are going to also be hit by unemployment, and their next generation is also going to suffer. But I still do believe they have a lot more, capacity to wait before this happens. So one of the things that we do not find in media is a clear understanding of what is the unorganized sector, what are construction workers. Even the best media which goes there goes with a view to bring some images out, a short summary, and a kind of a reflection of the situation to create kind of empathy for them. And rather than how do we correct the situation, and it cannot be done by a few people like a few groups of people like us, a few trade unions and people's organizations, which I have taken on this challenge for many years. And our voices are hardly heard in the planning process. We are just cut off from the bureaucracy, which is making these decisions. Even if we request them to hear us, they have no time. So we have faced huge challenges, and our government in Tamil Nadu has not been very different from the central government. In fact, it seems like they're one and the same actually in their style of functioning, which is do nothing, close your eyes, and so on. Not just do nothing. If we can take away what is ordinary people's property or money, that also we can do. That's fine. So let us say that we work in many communities which are already suffering because of relocation. There was eviction of nearly 1.5 lakh families from the inner city of Chennai to the outskirts over the last 10 years or so. More recently, in the last 3 years. And most of our union members were in these communities, and so our union actually faced a huge depletion of members. Also, our union faced, a crisis. Our numbers, not only the numbers go down, but we then now have to look for our members in new areas, in new settlements, and with new issues. And so we then had to focus on resettlement sites, and it took us a few years to even, because of we don't have the kind of funding that is required, or the people, full-time people that can be, sent so far away, 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, places where there's no regular transport, places where which now come under villages or panchayats rather than in cities. So in these large sprawling cities, which look like they're very well organized for the rich, who can Google their, destinations and locations, who are digitally engaged. We have in the last 10 or 15 years found that our membership is actually worse off than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And they're being taken away from their traditional regions, have lost healthcare, have lost the right to, better education from even though they brought this Right to Education Act, but you have removed them from their traditional areas, and the education system in those new places, municipalities or in panchayats, is of a poorer quality or inadequate or not there at all. And this has been the situation which I'm trying to sort of capture for Chennai. It may be a little better here or there, but virtually the last 10 or 15 years, whether it was the city planning, I'm going to speak more of urban, unorganized and informal sector workers to begin with. So what we actually found that these people actually have been sent into other places. So we had to retrain our membership to work in gram panchayats and to make claims and demands through that. That was one thing. The second thing was that we are still fighting for, subsidies on transport so that they can go to their workplace. We organized them because they themselves went through depression, and they get stigmatized because the areas are supposed to be, dens of, disease or pestilence. Even though they are now in buildings, anywhere working class people live, there is this stigma and this, the attitude of the upper classes that, or they're not clean, or they're all crowded, or they're like this. So in our society, there is so much antagonism to working class people, which is always getting reflected in various ways. And so what COVID has done is it has sharpened these, it has opened these fissures into public, and it's become far more visible. I would say migrant labor is much worse off than even our local workers, because they get paid often less, but less than most of the skilled workers, male skilled workers. And their lives are far more precarious in the sense that they don't know where they're going to work or where they're going to stay, and they can move from month to month or even day to day. Even in the destinations where they are working. So 1 month they could work on one site, and the next month they might work on the other. And even their wages are not very secure, just as their home where they're, or whatever, their temporary home is not secure. So what I'm trying to say is that the problem of migrant workers is just the reflection of the other working class people on this side. They're like two sides of the same coin. So when we were seeing these migrants also going through these crises, and many of our friends and comrades have set up small groups to start to support them and helplines, because being in Chennai city or wherever, the best way was to, set up WhatsApp groups and telephone and helplines, so that this connected our support groups really connected across Tamil Nadu, wherever there were workers. The government of Tamil Nadu actually was saying there are only 50,000, but in our estimate, there should be at least between 10 and 15 lakh migrant workers in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, in all types of professions. So this, I can say about construction workers. Our immediate, there's a construction workers labor board which has been there from 90s. So our first effort was to get the boards to provide financial support and rations to the construction workers. And to some extent, these boards responded by giving some 1,000 or 2,000 rupees and rations in the first lockdown. I think the unions will now campaign again to get certain more cash support and rations again. But these are very small things. What we also found was, despite the fact that unions have been working for so many years with these labor boards, their documentation is very poor. Even then, when we were required to then provide the documentation of our members registered on the board. And so the second week or third week, that's what we were doing. We were actually collecting data from our members under, where we can't meet each other. And they were poor people who were, not having the technology. And it was very tough. Literally thousands of people's data was being collected by our offices. And I'm not saying that it was very effective, but we did get some small amounts from most of our members. But if this is the state of labor boards in Tamil Nadu, then you can imagine where there's so many unions which are working. You can imagine the labor boards and their capacities to work with people elsewhere in the country. So virtually, though they have collected maybe 52,000 crores or 70,000 crores or whatever the amount of money that these boards have, this money is lying in bank accounts, and I'm quite sure it is being used by the government as its own fund. It is a very watchful effort of the Tamil Nadu unions here, which keeps on questioning them, which has exposed them repeatedly, which has shown that they have failed in providing these, social security benefits, and is continuing to fight at the labor board level every single day, and basically saying, you people don't have data from before 2015. So this, and they have spent, of the labor board's expenditure, they spend actually 20-25% on just staff and, costs. So even running these labor boards and social security programs has to have some basic norms, has to have certain basic, direction. If the bureaucracies take over, we will definitely not be able to help anybody in the informal sector. And whether it is the ESI or the PF or the labor welfare boards, these are run for people who have fewer resources, who are workers who are working long hours, who don't have a system of maintaining their own records. And therefore, often they have to depend on others. And these organizations are all very anti-labor unions. So union leaders are supposed to be kept out, they are troublemakers. Even in the Tamil Nadu Labor Board, till the COVID crisis, we were told, you please stand outside the registrar's office, registration office, don't come near us. Unions are not allowed. So they have politicized these boards. They have taken over. Their bureaucracy and politicians sort of control the resources. So the tripartite nature, where labor has a say in the functioning of these boards, has to be strengthened across India, not just in Tamil Nadu or Kerala, but across India. Karnataka still doesn't have boards. And so this is one thing that I'd like to say. In terms of registration of workers, there are problems with the law itself, which were pointed out right when the law came, that you have to make it friendly for workers and unions to register. You cannot register them through facilitation centers and through vague organizations which they will lose connect. It's like an insurance person who does insurances. He just comes and he registers you, and if he forgets to collect it, you will not even pay your insurance dues. So these are the kind of problems that active local organizing, constructive action, and dealing with bureaucratic bureaucratic structures in a very tough way. I would say in Tamil Nadu, we do deal with terrible bureaucracy. I mean, they claim to be doing a lot of work, but the way in which they have defined containment zones. The containment zone, say, next to my house, which is on a pretty upper section, upper middle class area, the doctor has turned COVID positive next door to our house. We are not affected. His house has a board which says nobody can enter and all that. But if this happens in a slum area, the entire slum is stigmatized. And so when a person from Perumbakam has to people have to go to work, they say, no, but Perumbakam has 27,000 families in 8-story buildings, and maybe one building is affected, but you will have stigmatized everyone, and you would declare it a containment zone. I have not heard even now of one domestic worker being COVID positive. I've searched, I keep a regular tab on who is being declared. Nobody has done any proper occupation-based analysis of the data. They said it was first a religious profiling of COVID victims. Then it came to some geographical profiling of the COVID victims. But nobody wants to do an occupational, profiling of the COVID victims, because majority of them are in the front lines. They're doctors, they're nurses, they're caregivers, they're sanitation workers, they're police people. They're the whole bunch of people who are actually suffering and bringing this disease back to us. So in our communities, we found, of course, there were tabligis also in some of our communities when that's a chapter that's over, because tabligis are basically people who are come from very, very ordinary poor families, and what we saw in Tamil Nadu was they are all in our communities, among our workers, and they are just part of our own society. And they were very good. They worked with the government. They stayed home. They did home quarantine. They recovered. So anybody who has corona is not only going to create problem if they're from the working class. They are very conscious of themselves. They're very conscious that if they get sick and they infect their children or their community. But it is the government who actually is creating this stigma and this whole isolation and this wrong kind of publicity. And it's the upper classes who are the newspaper, media, and the television who seem to think it's a great enterprise to keep reporting news only on these issues as if everything else in life is stopped. So I'm going to stop here with this and speak about one more sector with which I work very closely, is the export garment industry. The export garment industry in Tamil Nadu is located largely in the western districts, that is near Coimbatore, surrounding areas, Erode, Salem, Dharmapuri, Tirupur. And then it is also located in Chennai. So in the western districts of Tamil Nadu, they basically do more banyan knitwear, hosiery and that stuff. And now they're also entering into garment sector. Chennai is basically apparel, that's garmenting, that's ready-made garments. Now, what we found was once they shut down on 23rd or 24th, many of the garment companies gave only wages up to the days that they had worked. The large companies, because of some announcements made at an international level where the industry or global union had an agreement with big garment manufacturers abroad, that is big brands. Oh, let me just quickly also say, most of the export garment industries in a supply chain producing for huge brands like H&M, Nike, name them, Marks and Spencers and so on, Victoria's Secret. So big brands. Now these workers were promised that they would get paid for April. But we find now when we are going into the communities that they have been not paid for April. Most of them have been given half the wages and said this is only advance and we will deduct it from future earnings. The second thing that has happened to the garment industry is that many companies have closed their orders and therefore there are no orders, and even the inputs which were basically raw material like cloth and so on is not available because it is in other districts or it had to be imported or so on. And so there's a kind of a stagnation in this industry. Now we find only 10 or 15% of the workers going to these factories. As it is, the government had capped it to 30%, but only 10 or 15% of the workers have started working from about May 10th, 11th, and so on. This is very worrying because it means that women workers are losing jobs on a scale that's unbelievable. Domestic workers have no work, garment workers have no work, the home-based workers have no work. It's really scary for us. So this is one of the issues that we have now. We have tried to create a database of the factories, of the brands, and the number of workers, what their status is, and so on. And I'm hoping that, in fact, this evening we are going to have a discussion with Industrial and see how we can take this forward. But I don't think there will be any solution unless these young women are willing to come out. And unless the government of Tamil Nadu is willing to take on more specific measures to deal with these industries. I can say that from the experience of Bangalore, a lot of the factories have been trying to downsize, remove their, their machines and shift production or close down production and sell off the factories. If that process starts, it will be much worse. And yes, it's always a fear because garment industry is not like an auto industry where it's more stable. It always keeps shifting according to labor costs and transport costs. So the other thing is what's happened in Tirupur is much worse because their workers were working for 13, 14 hours a day. They were not paid wages, and during this period, it's all come out. And our basic challenge is how to get the women workers out of Tirupur. That's a huge challenge for us, and that's an everyday crisis also. So for our union, we are like closed into our houses, but work has increased exponentially. our crisis has increased. We all need to think of how collectively unorganized sector workers or informal sector workers don't get driven into poverty and destitution. The last thing I'll say is most of the women workers, even if they're on monthly wages, their husbands are painters, auto drivers, ironmen, and so on. So they are also they're maybe the skilled workers, and they may be earning actually much higher wages. Daily earnings. They might, like construction workers, might be earning 800-900 rupees a day. Taxi driver might be earning 700. So more auto drivers may be earning more. So most of our women are married to people who are in the reasonably high earning informal sector in an urban area. And what's worrying us is that they have no jobs either. While the interesting thing is, while air travel is around, the poor auto is lying on the side of the street. And even if anyone steps out, they would be arrested or the auto will be confiscated. So things are very, very grim locally as well as on the highways. I have not been able to give you any suggestions. I basically, possibly have described what everyone else knows. So as in terms of suggestions, I think we need to work on the labor welfare boards in more constructive ways. We need to deal with the government and the local authorities and ensure that they dialogue with the local communities and don't treat them just like, objects to be moved here and there. While they are willing to talk to the RWAs, but they're not willing to talk to domestic workers. That's really, so bureaucracy must realize that without a dialogue with the people, they will not find any comfortable solution. And I would say for the export garment sector, it's a very frightening scenario where I can see loss of employment in the long term or in the short term. And this is where, more important that government holds tripartite discussions with unions and with employers. And they just hold meetings with employers, and the finance ministry is busy trying to give them some support, but that's a very inadequate solution. It has to have a long-term process, and workers need to be brought into the mainstream. The last 5 years, the BJP government has actually refused to have a dialogue with unions, and the Indian Labour Conference was not even being held. And also the central trade unions must be willing to include our ideas and thoughts from the margins into their decision-making process, and not just call us other trade unions and organizations. I mean, we bring in a lot of rich experience, and therefore our experience should be taken seriously. Thank you.
So, thank you, Sujata, for initiating the discussion. Actually, we're still waiting for Tanveer Pasha, who is actually stuck in a hospital emergency. So what I would do is I'll actually just read out some of the questions to Sujata, and she can talk about that. But before I do that, I just want to make one or two remarks about what Sujata said. Firstly, the situation in the urban areas of Delhi and Bombay and these kinds of places is quite similar, especially with the domestic workers. And I can share with you one small step that we took over here regarding the domestic workers. We've been, as a part of the All India Democratic Women's Association, we've been organizing the domestic workers in Delhi for quite some time now. And even in Maharashtra, we've been organizing the domestic workers for quite some time now. But when we went for the registration about 2 years ago, the Delhi government has refused to register the union. It refused to register the union despite anybody who's a fan of AAP, I don't know why they have refused to register, saying in no state are unions registered, which is a lie, in fact. That in no state domestic worker unions are registered. After refusing to register the unions, they gave the RWA, after May 4th, they gave the RWA the authority to decide whether domestic workers should be allowed inside or not, which is effectively just outsourcing policy making to local dadagiri of employers associations. So the EDWA, along with some other organizations, we wrote a letter to Kejriwal, and in fact, we also tried to get some pressure put on Kejriwal, and in fact, the Manish Sisodia had to ask the bureaucracy to issue orders where the powers to decide were taken away from the RWA. And because the powers to decide were taken away from the RWA, at least some women, maybe 50%, have got back 50% of their work right now. But I think that as far as informal work is concerned, it's really a matter of also raising the consciousness, not only of the bureaucracy in the state, but also of the middle class employers, the small traders, as well as the labor unions themselves. The consciousness of these actors is also one where you're basically just trying to say that, okay, if we formalize them, things will become better. Of course, they will become better. But we know that, the ILO has come up with a recent estimate, which basically says that even in the organized sector, that is, people with some amount of social protection, more than half will lose their jobs in developed countries. So you can imagine what is going to happen to them in the countries which are not considered so-called developed countries. So what we know is that joblessness is going to increase, and if joblessness is going to increase, the competition within the working class is also going to increase. So I think that we have to find a method or a way of dealing with the contradictions that are emerging in the working class to maintain the unity amongst the organized segment and the large diverse section of the so-called unorganized segment. There's a lot of unorganized segment within the organized segment also, actually speaking, which is what makes it 95%, 94% like that. So I'm placing a question before the audience here and before Sujata. How do we deal with the contradictions within informal labor, because it's very diverse and it has a power structure also. It also has a power structure, and linking with that is some of the questions that have been raised about migrant workers. That simply by calling them outsiders and migrant workers, we are discriminating against them. And this is a really undignified way of even categorizing workers. This is what one of the questions is saying, and one or two people are agreeing with that. I can read it out. I really want us to come up with terms better than migrant laborers, labor resource, and labor force. These terms just dehumanize people behind the terms. We either abuse their privacy by sharing their pictures all over, or dehumanize them by refusing to acknowledge their stories and identities. That's the exact comment that has been made. There are some comments about whether skills will lead to better situation of informal labor. Actually, I have a slight problem with this question because I think actually people are very skilled. They're just classed as unskilled. It's not as if people are, I mean, if you ask me to do certain jobs that a woman worker does, even in the house I've been trying to do, you know, it's not an unskilled job. You have to have the knack and the way of doing it. Secondly, the entire question of skilling, I think this is also a method of cheapening labor. The entire way in which you look at the question of skilling, so I'd like her to comment on that also. And thirdly, I would like to say that as far as you raise the employment of declining women's employment, actually this is a problem that we have faced for the last decade and it's only going to worsen. But I think in order to look at that, we have to look at the rural-urban connections. We have to look at the rural-urban connections within the labor force itself. Because what's happening is people who work in rural work for 3 months are now also becoming casual workers in non-farm employment within urban areas and then going back. And this is also happening, as far as my experience is concerned, this is also happening a lot with women workers. People used to just move within the district while neighboring districts are beginning to move. And strangely, that migration is now being called associational migration, which by the data, which is actually not associational migration. People are moving because they can't handle the distress. Women need to work. They're not getting jobs also. That's why you see that in the urban, even in the rudimentary statistical data in the urban data, you find that actually the women, the decline in the female workforce and the people willing, labor force, I wouldn't say workforce, that is the people who are willing to work is actually much higher amongst the female workers. It's actually the rate is going up much higher. So I think that connection has to be really made, and we cannot really talk about it without talking about what is happening to the rural workers. And I think Sujata, do you want to respond to that before some people who have raised their hands to talk, would like to talk? Yeah.
Actually, Archana, you've raised very important issues which are structural issues which have been now become really, what would I say, completely embedded into our economic development. Women have no avenue of acquiring modern skills. Traditional skills are treated very with disdain, and therefore, we know that how even the, care workers, the Anganwadi and the Asha workers and all that, they are just treated like, use and throw. When the bureaucracy wants them for any purpose, they are used. They don't, then their work is not really respected. And so women's work has no, is really not visible at all, and or recognized or seen as work which needs to be valued and paid for at the same level as male work. So a construction worker may get 600 or 800 or 900, even 1,000 a day. But a woman worker, for her to get, okay, in the construction industry, women do get paid 500-600 in Tamil Nadu. But domestic workers, care workers, they cannot imagine those kind of salaries at So I think there needs to be a kind of restructuring of, our own economic processes. When people like Amartya Sen and Jean Drèze, keep on emphasizing on the need to invest in health and education, I see a value in that, because it's not only construction of roads, bridges, and IT complexes that will add to our wealth, or even to employment. Employment can also be like, as we have found, ASHA workers are very important to the whole health process, and if they're properly remunerated, that will become a technical job where you require trained and well entrenched, educated, and caregiving can become a very important profession. But caregiving, cleaning, whether it's municipalities or housekeeping in big IT complexes or colonies, and then domestic work, all these are not treated as work at all. So how do we structure a new economy? Means we have to look at women's work as a very important domain. If we do that, or even in the forest dwellers or the Adivasi people, they do a huge number of things, but their work is not, if the Adivasi woman makes a bead necklace, and if she sells it, it will cost 100 rupees. The same thing, you put it in Fab India, it will cost maybe 1,000 rupees. And then if it has, some other design, it will cost. So what I'm saying is, we are in an economy which downgrades any work which is care, cleaning, handicraft, and instead the use and throw economies become much more powerful, and they pay themselves. In fact, I started to read Small is Beautiful a few days ago, because I kept thinking this COVID thing has really shown us that we cannot continue to live in the same old way. And one thing that he's pointing out in that is how work itself is calculated. Like, if you become an engineer, you actually acquire that kind of education, and then you set your value for your education so high, but does it mean an engineer has done as much work as a mason or a mestri? But he will get paid, say 2 lakhs of rupees a month, and this guy gets paid maybe by working morning to night. So how do we actually define wage? How do we insist that our labor also starts to think of themselves as far more productive? And then we come to questions like, what do we want to build? I mean, what is the use of these grand buildings where even now I see, even when I was looking on the TV and looking at Bihar, and I saw the build, I was trying to locate the collector's office in Baloda Bazaar and Korba. They have built district collectors' offices which look like big huge manors, or whatever you call them, huge palaces. And the whole design and the structure is like that. Instead, could they not have used those resources better in some way? So my question is, we are not the people who make decisions, we just labor. When will we become decision makers? This design does not suit my geography. This design is too expensive in terms of this. Why are we bringing stones from Rajasthan? Why are workers not given a right to decide what has to be constructed, at least in their own district? And every district has a budget. They should be saying, we should, before they do anything, they should be call for discussions on what do we need and what do we not need. This is something I feel very strongly about, and I don't know. I mean, this is really far-fetched, and people will say you're imagining, unless construction workers can decide what they want to build, we cannot actually build a better society.
Actually, there are a couple of other questions. One is related to cash transfers. People want your comments on cash transfers and whether employment guarantee can actually help to solve the problem. The second thing is about registration. There are issues being raised about registration, about whether it's not only the fault of the government, but whether we should reflect on the way in which we have dealt with this issue also by not organizing enough on it. I think that's one question about, and it comes from labor activists themselves, who are basically raising issues about how do we look inward at our politics and the way we deal with the informal labor. That is one question that has been raised. There is another about labor shortages, that how will this impact on industry? I don't actually agree with the question, but this question has been asked. How will that impact the industry? Second, what do you think of the term guest workers? That is the other question that has been asked, and something more about the export sector. I think there's one question being asked about something more about the export.
Yeah, I'll just let me take it from the last question on the export. There is a huge downturn, economic downturn in America and Europe and other parts of the world. And as you can see, the US is in total turmoil. We are hearing about many brands closing down, some of the brands downsizing, closing down, shops, even thinking of going online. So these are some of our worries, and we do believe that at least in the short term, there is going to be a decline in demand of exports, at least in the garment industry, I can say for sure, which I'm seeing very closely. That is one thing. The thing that you said about registration of workers, that all of us have failed. Actually, the governments, the way they structure the labor boards, they create hurdles in registration, renewals, getting any kind of welfare benefits. We have a long history of working. Maybe I will sit down and write, but there is the whole effort of the bureaucracy. It is to deny welfare, deny benefits, deny anything to go to the unorganized. This idea of that they have to certify everything. The village officer has to certify, the district collector has to certify. We have so many layers of government. Your age has to be certified by a government doctor. When we first registered a worker, we required only a ration card. Then the ration card would be incorrectly, the age of the person would be incorrect because the government, the person official did not know the name or the age of the worker. And in those days, people didn't even remember when they were born. They would arbitrarily say this. Now, a government employee, another government employee doctor registers the age. So then when we go back and say, no, this is not the age and that is not the age, they set limits. Only workers over below the age of 55 will be registered. So government creates so many hurdles. We were not able to get pension for so many of our workers because of this age problem, because many different certificates had been given for them by various officials. And finally, the government took the position that we don't know. We will go only by such and such, by the doctor's certificate, which was finally wrong. So what I'm saying is that bureaucracy serves itself. It's highly corrupt. It creates so many hurdles. We have a whole machine in our organization and in our trade unions to work against this. And even then, so many times it leads to huge fights. And, then our own central trade unions cause more problems. So I would say, I won't blame us. We need to sit together, and in fact, I thought I should now travel to every state and see what is the problem with each of their labor boards. Because it's the bureaucracy involved which is a hindrance. And the bureaucracy should assist civil society and the unions to unionize. There's so many hindrances to us to unionize. We don't get recognized. We don't get a membership on the labor board. We don't get to hear about the circulars and the new changes in the laws. And then we're just fighting against to keep what we already have. So I think it is not our fault.
So, Sujata, actually there's a few comments. I'll read them out to you. You can please take them all together, okay? First is saying that I'm not a supporter of, this is Franco writing.
Yeah, okay, I understand. You want to read it out?
The Tamil Nadu government, but you have to give the devil what is due. The PDS supplier and rupees 1,000 per month was prompt. My experience on getting support from bureaucracy was good. They accommodated migrant workers in nearby community centers. The Amma canteens provided free food. Agricultural operations were allowed in procurement of produce and distribution also done. Yes, much more was needed, he says. Then Ashok Chaudhary, middle class people have generally become anti-poor, hence anti-labor. Most domestic workers, servants. So how are unions going to deal with the middle class? This is one question that has been raised. Then there's a question about employment guarantee and cash transfers, also addressed to me, but I think if you want to answer that, you can. It says, could you speak about expanding employment guarantee to urban areas to address the problem of joblessness? What is your thought on basic income and direct cash transfer?
I agree with Franco that there was some very basic universal delivery of 1,000 rupees as cash transfer and food in the first lockdown period. I mean, it was very efficient, very quick, so it was good. And the issue of the migrant workers, I would say that the government was unprepared to deal with the migrant workers, especially, but once they realized that this was going to be an issue, they set in place certain norms and, method of, so they have some system now in place. Whether they got food from Amma canteens, yes, they did get food from Amma canteens. But the labor department was dead. It did not push them to pay wages for 2 months, 3 months. And so migrant workers felt extremely let down. that they were not being paid wages. Their living conditions were horrendous. They were not even being provided food and water. I mean, we have now, I'm following on garment workers in Tirupur. It is scary. They're working 13 hours a day, 14 hours a day. There's violence, there's intimidation, there's non-payment of wages. We are not able, there's no authority to deal with them. One of the hostels where we were helping them, there was a message that one of the girls has actually tried to contact somebody outside, and she had 2 a.m. in the night, I had to call the district collector to say, please send women police to protect her. And so I'm not happy with the way in which women migrants are dealing with their being jailed and imprisoned in Tirupur and other places. It's terrible. So that's answering Franco. Cash transfer. I would say in this circumstance, cash transfer are absolutely urgent. Just giving ration rice, the poor quality of rice which people cannot actually eat. So minimum of 5,000 rupees to every worker till they get back to jobs. Only if you insist on this kind of cash transfer are they going to start looking at you as a construction worker and as a domestic worker. We have to insist, and all of us in one voice have to talk on this cash transfer. Yes, COVID requires cash transfers to workers, not just to industry. By saving industry, you will not save workers. We have now, actually this is something that we are trying to do is get pictures out of people's kitchens, what they're cooking. What food is on their plate that day. And if this is the state of Tamil Nadu, please tell me what would be the state of people in other parts. There was a picture of a migrant worker on a construction site somewhere in Hyderabad. He was drawing his pregnant wife and child with a makeshift kind of a trolley, and he apparently did it for so many 100 kilometers. And I saw the news clipping of a journal who had been to their house in the village in MP, and to cut it all short, they said there's nothing in the house. And the man, after coming to their house, when by the time the journalist reached, the mother and child were sitting there, and the man had gone to the forest to get firewood. So, I don't know, where is the middle class? What will wake them up? What will make them feel that these are human beings? Definitely cash transfer. And I'm not one votary for this Jandan account and all. It's all nonsense. Finally, when we were not able to do cash transfers in Chennai with banks, we were finally doing it they were opening new post office accounts. So 50% of the cash transfers by the labor boards are being done by post office accounts. So we need to go back and use the postal system. So these are some of the learnings that we had here. Okay.
So there are a couple of questions on rising disparities. Due to the system in place, the demand and supply in setting wages cannot be denied. Do speakers have suggestions for equitable future for better education, health and jobs? For example, a lot of engineers are paid a lot more. Then there's a similar question regarding right to education, and also the gaps between the workers and the ठेकेदार्स in terms of who makes more money, so the rate of accumulation. Then there's one question about environmental issues being falsely pitted against labor issues. Given the negative environmental impacts of many big garment industries, what are the ways that this lull in economy can help us to change the business dynamics, and what are the transition tactics? This is the other question.
There are labor laws such as the Payment of Wages Act, the Interstate Migrant Workers Act, the Contract Labor Act, which and the minimum wage. So if we can put into place a very, very basic idea of how a worker should be paid, maybe through a bank account, and these wages are monitored, then we would be able to deal with the fact that the whatever dalal or the thekedar is able to not grab the people's money, the workers' money. But this is actually not a question which can be addressed by people like us. It has to be addressed by the industry that employs them, because they employ them on piece rate. They don't actually want to treat these workers as workers, their own workers. They want to treat them only as someone whom they would like to use and throw. And so they don't like to actually, and they treat the thekedar as a supervisor or something. In one of the factories I'm dealing with in Tirupur, the thekedar was beaten up and they were trying to throw him out because they wanted to exploit these workers. So it's not the thekedar who is at fault. It's the system of employment by the employers, the principal employers, the system which allows for this, subcontract, contract, subcontract, and lack of registration of subcontractors. And they're breaking the system into a very complex thing, and that these employers also want to extract maximum work and pay the least. So I don't think I would blame the thekedar alone.
Okay, so actually I'll just take a rain check on the rest of the questions, because I've just been told that Shakun will speak on the work amongst sex workers and the impact of the pandemic on them. So I'd request Shakun to speak.
Hi, I know this is very impromptu. I was, it's sex workers, I think we'll come to a little later. I would just like to respond a little bit to Sujata's. And Sujata has been speaking, I think everything she spoke goes for most migrant workers as well as workers in not very organized sectors. When you speak of garment workers, Bangalore has like 500,000 plus garment workers. 80% of them are women at very lower bench levels. So when the workers start organizing, we have quite a few strong unions in Bangalore. Like they have been making some changes in their respective areas. But when they start organizing, what happens is, though initially they organize with the help of women's organizations, etc., which help them to become stronger. But what happened, the apparel producers organizations are much stronger. They have the money, they have the influence, they have the political reach. So what they started doing was bringing workers from out of state, like from North and even from Andhra in some cases, and putting them in virtual jails, actually jails. They put them in hostels which have rails where they can't go out, they are taken in a bus, brought them back. So this is nothing less than bonded labor. So we have to look at that also, because the moment you start organizing, the moment you start little bit of collective bargaining, even the very small bit, what the worker, and the other thing is they start moving out of a city like Bangalore or even Chennai, I'm sure, or Erode, they start moving them to other smaller places. And most of the garment workers in Bangalore come from places like Ramnagaram, Maddur, which are nearby, 60, 70 kilometers away in villages. and they come and live in Bangalore. Now they have been living there, working there for the past 15, 20 years. Now if the work, because the industries cannot stand up to the unions in their pressure, they started moving the industry itself to Maddur, Mandya and the smaller towns, where the women, for them it's convenient, it's next to their house, but then they have there they cannot do much because they cannot organize, because it's so close to their house. They take a very personal kind of a vengeance kind of act. If any woman raises her voice, what they do is ring up to her husband, her father, and that to that level the industrialists go. So I think it's what we need to do is also organize, but along with organizations, there has to be human rights organizations which need to stand strongly behind all these workers who are semi-organized or unorganized, or even to some extent organized by the larger unions. The question with larger unions is they only look at the work issue, they don't look at other issues where, the other contexts in which the workers work. They come from slums, they live in very bad conditions, they have no absolutely mobility problems and all these things, and still they need to work. So they live in the city and work, and when something like this pandemic happens, suddenly they have no work, no money to pay rent, and they don't know what their future is. Even the little money they were getting is in doubt. So it's the same with domestic workers. So then when workers in these sectors have so many problems, you think of sex workers who are slightly, at least I speak only, I know I have worked extensively with sex workers in street sex work. So the street sex workers are pretty independent. They are much more independent of any organized sex establishment. So they are individuals, and many of them work some work as a domestic worker, work in the garment industry, or works in a factory, and in the evening they would come and earn a little money. So, I mean, it's very difficult for us, I know that middle class, it's very difficult to understand why sex work is not illegal in India. It is not illegal. Sex work is defined as work, and sex work is defined as pushing somebody into sex industry. So it's the work itself is not illegal, but sex work is pushing somebody into sex industry is illegal, or living off the earnings is illegal, etc. So when that is the case, sex workers, the little bit they have organized, they managed to have at least in Bangalore, I know they have managed to have a strong voice with the government because of the years of work that other organizations have been working with them. They have a support group, whether it's a sex workers union from Sangama or the other sex workers organizations, which started with HIV programs, and some like Sadhana Mahila Sangha works only on dignity and violence against women on the street. So there are organizations that have managed to, sort of gather some kind of support to negotiate, and also they have increased their ability to work with the government agencies, reach to them, etc. But what happens outside the city? Like outside the city, they're really mostly left to themselves. And though there are organizations, they're not able to reach the same kind of, they don't have the same reach that. So if I'm a sex worker, think of pandemic, and they are really in a total confusion today. On the one hand, it's whether I'll have any more clients. On the other hand, whether I will be able to do this without putting my life into danger. So this is the kind of a thing. They have learned a lot from the process of HIV and protecting themselves, and they have been also used by the government agencies and NGOs to educate clients and public. But today, with the pandemic, they are really left in the lurch as far as, and they are not, many of the women who are HIV positive, not only sex workers, other people also, who are HIV positive people are not able to access ARTs. So, and nobody's talking, there are very few voices which are raising about this. Even when you ask the government, there's no answer to it, though there is a law that all the government hospitals have to register positive people and give them the necessary medicines, etc. but it's become really a problem. It's not just food for them. It's not just food. It's also like they are the same like any other workers. They have been living in rented houses, and also their lives even in rented houses are very, very volatile, because the moment the owner or the neighbors feel that they are doing something which is not acceptable socially, then they throw them out, or they start exploiting them, asking, I mean, they really get exploited or get thrown out. And now with the thing like pandemic and with no earnings, they're really left, and they're not even able to think of a future where they can live with dignity. So I am seeing a future of workers who are like really in the middle of a sea of uncertainty, as something that they will not only look to the government and look to the sun, but many of them will have to, I think many of them are, I don't know, it may not be, but it's in my opinion, and I'm talking not of migrant workers as such, there are migrants because they come from the villages to the city. They go back to the villages, and then somehow they have been earning all these years and supporting families back home. So some of them feel that they can now lean on their family a little bit, but even that, I'm not the same. But we have to think of, I think for the whole worker class in uncertain conditions or exploited work, or in very stigma producing work, I think we need to think of some kind of a large imagination we need to have about what will they do about livelihood. It's not just work. Livelihood is much larger than work. It's also a life of dignity, and it encompasses work, their life, their family, everything. So what do they do about livelihood? What do we do about livelihoods? What do we do about livelihoods of people who are walking out of cities and walking, struggling, getting back to the villages, getting quarantined, struggling there, no food, like how Sujata was saying about this family? Then they may come back. So what do they do? What is a livelihood that we can do? Are we only looking to the government, or are we also looking at middle class and other like people like us who have privileges? I think it's high time it's everybody's problem. I think it is everyone's problem. It's everyone's problem. We do not know it now, but slowly we'll realize there's nobody to clean your cities. There's nobody to build your cities. That's a thing like already people are talking about it, but it hasn't yet hit. It'll hit with the same impact that COVID has hit us. So I really feel that, we have to imagine in a collective way. We can't really hope that, somehow things will be all right. We can bring them back and work like, just organize them together and raise your voice. It's really not enough. The voice needs to be louder. All of us need to join that voice.
Okay, so actually we have about half an hour left, and some 2-3 really important points have been raised, which I'll take up. But before that, I think I want to give 5 minutes each to Maitri Prasad, Ashok Chaudhary and Thomas Franco, because they've been raising some important issues. So I'll give them those 5 minutes each, and then maybe take up the 2-3 important points that have been raised by Vijayan and others also, and Ashok Chaudhary himself. Thank you. Maitri, would you like to speak, please?
Hi, everyone. So glad to be part of this conversation and to listen to these things. And I speak from New York City. So as you just mentioned, it's quite something right now here. And this city has been devastated by this disease, this pandemic. And as you know, it has affected people of color, people from working class backgrounds disproportionately. And so I was wondering, how are we prepared to deal with this disease? How are trade unions prepared to deal with this disease in the national level? So it seems that, here at what I've noticed is that there have been talks of rent strikes. There have been talks of debt moratoriums. but those things need not be very practical in India. So I wanted to know about not just post-COVID, but what is the COVID plan that we have as trade unions and people working among workers. Second question, I think, has been very beautifully raised recently by this article in Indian Express that I've read by Shreya Ghosh and Rita Jyoti on the political subjectivity of migrant workers, and how it is important to, for example, they've raised the question of postal votes. So it seems that, in our country, our political rights and citizenship rights are very much centered in the states, and there is no national, there are no right-based citizenship at the national level, which would facilitate some kind of portability of rights. And this also relate to the question of cash transfers, and a very controversial, and this is very controversial because cash transfers would also involve a kind of centralization of many of these systems. Yeah, and I'm also wondering about specifically about debt, and also in the sense, also because CENFA has organized this. So as states and as central at the level of the center and the state, can there be debt moratoriums or debt jubilees? So is that something that we demand?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Ashok, Comrade Ashok.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Comrade.
Yes, my point was, I raised that part, I don't know, Sujata missed it. Since the neoliberalism came, that the gap between middle class and the working class has been widening. And now with this social distancing, it is now institutionalized. And now we need, let us be very frank, because all the middle class, most of them generally speaking, have become totally anti-workers, anti-poor, and anti-minority, anti-others. Of course, they have been anti-Adivasi for a long time. So that is nothing new. But we all, the middle class, trade union activists or social, come from that class, middle class. So how as a trade union, it's very important to protect the workers now. Now this middle class have become protector of the state. What Mr. Tushar Mehta speaking in the Supreme Court is not just an isolated thing, it's a consensus of a broad majority of the middle class. So how do, as a trade union, how we are going to challenge that? We have to fight against our own class. And unless that will, this complaint will go on that the bureaucracy is not looking after us, not attending, it is nothing new. The registration problem, even the dignity question, the livelihood question, have never been recognized by our civilized sections. So even you see, even the civil society, that they don't raise this issue of livelihood and dignity rights. The question only their activities up to charity business, welfare business, that's all. So now I think we have to seriously think, not only trade union, but all the organizations, especially the trade union must take lead into that we have to say openly against the middle class. Along with the Indian state, we have to take that fight, and I don't know, we have to decide the strategy, but we must recognize that we have to deal with the middle class in this, our domestic workers. The March change, it was decided our lockdown business was the last week of March. They haven't paid the March salary. And all these women were sitting outside the colonies and demanding money, and they are not being attended. Not even the people who gadi dhone wala, car washers, they are not given money. So these are the, and they, in the name of protection, social distancing, RWA business. These are all anti-poor institutions, and that has to be challenged. So that's my point, that we must recognize it, and we have to collectively work for a comprehensive strategy. It's not just a fight against the capitalist state. The entire middle class is with them, and they are working against the interests of the working class. That we have to recognize. Thanks.
Franco.
I just have 3 points. It's rather like recommendations or suggestions. Number one, this central government as well as the state government, we have to put up certain demands, in which I am suggesting that we should insist that every worker, whether they are guest workers or agricultural laborers, everyone should have an identity card issued, which will entitle them to certain social benefits as well as health benefits. That is one demand. Number two, the welfare boards, their functionings require a lot of improvement. Number three, the state governments especially, they should, if necessary, get funds from the center also, but establish in every district, as per the need, number of hostels or quarters for the guest workers, where they can conveniently stay and they have adequate health and sanitary conditions. As trade unions, what we should do, there are 2 things I would like to suggest. Number one, yes, our experience may be bad with the labor department, but we cannot keep quiet. We have to fight with them one side. On the other hand, we have to enroll the people. I have experience in Tamil Nadu, especially in Kanyakumari district. We were involved in enrolling the construction workers, fish workers, agriculture laborers into the welfare board. There were certain difficulties. Even we have gone on agitation by the trade union, but most of them are now registered. Now our issue, what we are having is that they are not allowed to continue the membership after 60. And after 60, Kerala is providing a pension which Tamil Nadu is not providing. So there are issues like that. But as trade union, we should work more with the unorganized sector and enroll them into this welfare board so that they get at least some minimum benefit. But we have to fight for improving those benefits also. The second point as suggestions to the trade union is based on my experience with the State Bank Officers Association and the All India Bank Officers Confederation. We have over a period of years, now it is like our school is 33-year old. We started as a small school, and today we are able to provide free education to the children of our members. We are also catering to the other larger section of the society who are subsidizing it, or their children are studying in the schools. Similarly, the cooperative society which we have constructed 1,800 flats for our offices and offices wards. Similarly, we have a credit society which gives loans up to 5 lakh per member. So similar models on a small scale can be done by the trade unions. Trade unions have to look at different alternatives, not only just fighting for their rights, but also get into certain activities. We cannot replace, and we should not replace government. We should insist what the government has to do, but we can create models, especially in the cooperatives. Kerala has labor cooperatives. Like that, there are many new things we should try to do, and this should be the part of also the recommendation out of this seminar. Thank you.
Yeah, so see, there's one question that has been raised about climate change and the workers. So I'd like actually, if Ashish is still there, he could comment on, it's on actually the climate crisis will have an impact on industry and workers. especially after the pandemic, what kind of measures should be taken so that the workers are less impacted, and what kind of demand should the trade unions raise?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I think, I mean, this is of course maybe a topic for another entire webinar, but definitely it's not, the climate crisis is not going to have serious impacts, it's already having it. Already people across the country, especially those in the primary sector, but also those who are working in, say, some secondary sectors, small scale manufacturing, etc., especially those that are based on nature and natural resources, are already being seriously impacted. So what this crisis, the pandemic, has shown us is the need for resilience amongst communities, including workers in the communities, to be able to be more self-reliant with regard to the kind of occupations and livelihoods that they have. And this also relates to a point I think that Sujata and others were making earlier, about having to look at medium and long-term kind of a program for the revitalization of economies from the point of view of local self-reliance. I know there are enormous issues of caste and gender and so on that have to be dealt with in this, but I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that the millions of people who have gone back to their villages or to small towns, or who are currently unoccupied in the cities and are not able to go anywhere, need to have dignified livelihoods that they can be in control of. That's the overall sort of economic transformation that we need. And this is also something that will help with with the climate impact. Just to give you one example, a lot of the workers that are currently in crisis are from agricultural backgrounds. And of course, because agriculture itself has collapsed, they are having to migrate out or do other kinds of things. But we have also hundreds of examples around the country of where, with the revitalization of agriculture or of crafts or of small scale manufacturing, medium scale manufacturing, or other kinds of occupations, they are able to actually sustain themselves in much better ways and don't have to do distress migration. And I think, I mean, this is an enormous subject, so I'm only obviously not doing justice to it. This also means, for instance, bringing back a diversity of livelihoods or occupations in each of these communities and settlements, because without that diversity, what will happen is that climate crisis, when it hits, like the pandemic right now that has hit, if there is only dependence on one kind of occupation, then, and if that is hit, then lots of people get affected. As a quick example, and then I'll end, many communities have taken to things like community-led ecotourism, which is a very good source of income. But right now it's collapsed because there is no vegetation, there's no tourism. And there's of course also class issues and caste issues involved with that. So we need to figure out how there can be much more resilient, diverse kinds of livelihoods that people can have, which enable them to be able to overcome any kind of crisis, including the climate crisis. Archana, I'll stop there because I think it's a very complex subject. The climate crisis hits different people in different sorts of ways. And the responses that we have to give in terms of both community resilience, but also what kind of actions we should take on a state which is completely callous and indifferent right now, what kind of policy shifts, what kind of resistance movements, etc., are fairly complex. So I don't think we should go into that right now. We should probably do a separate webinar on climate and the economy, where many of these complex subjects can be gone into. Thank you.
So I think a lot of issues have been raised, and we are at the end of this webinar now. So I'd like to just point to one or two things, and I have also a couple of suggestions for the organizing team. Firstly, I'd like to say that the whole question of middle class working amongst the middle class is really actually quite important, because you see, what is increasingly happening is that capital is trying to disinvest in the workspace, and more people are working inside their homes in localities and all kinds of things, and especially for informal labor. So if you really want to work in informal labor, your work has to get out of the factory. The trade unions have to organize in residential areas. They have to organize in community spaces. They have to organize in spaces where the workers themselves stay, and many people are doing that, but it's not happening enough. So this is one of the things that we need to really discuss. I think that the question of organizing strategies has to include both formal and informal together. Some alliances have to be built, because you see right now the labor laws don't cover informal labor, but they do some of, in some sectors. But with the labor codes, there's no possibility of providing any space to informal labor also. So it has to be a united working class fight, and for that, trade unions have to go out into the last mile spaces and work with people. Of course, there will be difficulties, but those difficulties have to be taken. It's not as if it's never happened in history. It has happened before also. Secondly, the point I think which has not really come out much is that when we talk about organized sector, we talk about regulation of capital and industry and all this kind of stuff. I think the same thing goes for informal labor. Without regulation of the highly salaried classes, and this, without actually pampering those classes, you cannot actually have a reduction in dispatch. Without getting rid of the pampering of those classes. So actually we have to bring back the issue of what kind of regulation, and not only tax regulation, but even disciplinary issues and other kinds of issues which should not only be imposed on labor, but with industry. Those kinds of demands have to be reworked in the context of the allowances industry also has to make. And so I think we need to rethink of just the financial liability issue, and the responsibility of industry towards working conditions in informal labor also has to be actually sort of emphasized much more. Thirdly, I think the issue of environment and changing land use. I think it's really an important issue, and I agree with Ashish that it actually requires a different segment. Fourthly, an issue was raised about digital workers and platform economies. I think that this is also another segment of workers that requires another webinar. So I think through this discussion, at least 3 sections can be identified that need to be pursued further ourselves, and that is, I think, a larger discussion on trade union strategies with all kinds of workers' organizations, not only trade unions. Secondly, the environmental issue, and I think we also urgently need something on the platform and digital workspaces, and I don't think that within a space of 2 hours we can just club everything. Informal labor in the digital workspace, crowdsourcing, it's a really huge and big issue with lots of new work in it. So we should actually think of actually expanding that discussion into a more specialized sphere, and I'll hand over to Bhargavi, who can close the session. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Thank you everyone for coming, and sorry about the other speakers. Like Geeta couldn't join because she had to attend to a relief work of some of the laborers whom she's working with, and Tanveer had a medical emergency. But really thanks for the other respondents who pitched in and also made this session more interesting and with a lot of discussions. And the next session would be on would deal with sanitation workers, waste pickers, and nurses and other health workers who have been on the front line of tackling the COVID crisis. We would have the session on this Friday. So thank you all.